So when it comes to the first two psukim, we can understand. The first pasuk in Parshas Nitzavim that talks about the return of Kibbutz Goliath, but it doesn't talk about a person, a Mashiach. It talks about the return of the dispersed of the Kibbutz Goliath. So therefore, we have to also bring the second one, which talks about Parshas Bilam. Parshas Bilam talks about a Mashiach, a king. There's will be a king. And the second one in return doesn't have necessarily the same toikev as it has in the words of the pasuk in Nitzavim. Because I'm just summarizing the next two paragraphs, because the Rambam is explaining the pasuk Dorach Keichem Yaakov V'kam Shevet Yisrael. It's not as so clear as the pasuk that says, so we understand why the Rambam had to bring both psukim. Okay. And then so the question is, why do you have to have another proof from the Ari Miklat? That's basically the Sif Aleph. Let's go to Sif Beis. And here the Rebbe is going to open up with a suggestion and then give us a little bit of explanation of what the background to the suggestion. It appears yesh chidush ikri there's a fundamental chidush in this raya over the previous two. And therefore the Rambam brings it as a separate halacha, because the Rambam is establishing a whole new geder, a whole new definition to the Yamun of Bisa Mashiach. What is this new chidush? The fact that is part of the mitzvah of Miklat has a new hagdara. Let's skip the bracket. Could nasa in the Bisa Mashiach echad mitnai mitzvah shabbatayra. Now Mashiach becomes not only a belief of Mashiach will come to bring shleimus Torah mitzvahs, it becomes part of a mitzvah of the Torah. In other words, even though the fact that there's a geula, that there will be a geula through Mashiach, clearly stated in the Torah. Until now, we didn't know that it's one of the mitzvahs. There's no mitzvah to believe in the geula. So Mashiach is not part of mitzvahs. By making it part of the mitzvah of Miklat, becomes one of the mitzvahs, part of a mitzvah of the Torah. What's the difference if it's just part of Torah or part of mitzvahs the Torah? And what is this mitzvah business? So we have to explain. But the basis of this is that it's clear that it's now becoming part of a mitzvah, a particular mitzvah. Till now, we know it's one of belief that Mashiach will come and he'll bring shleimus Torah mitzvahs. But now we're establishing a separate new hagdara, a new definition. It's a mitzvah. We'll see later. Let's build it. So firstly, there's a certain tkifus, a certain strength that a mitzvah has. So let's analyze the tkifus of the mitzvah. What's the Rambam write? The Rambam writes, in the very beginning of the Sefer Mishnah Torah, he writes in the Yesodus of Torah, that how do we look at mitzvahs? It is clear in the Torah, shehi mitzvah. The mitzvah remains standing forever, eternally. It has no changes, no deductions, no additions. Mitzvahs remain static the way they are forever. Mitzvah, what's this mitzvah that remains the same? Pirushoi tzivoy atayra, whatever the Torah commands. Ukehemshech divrei Rambam, the Rambam there writes, Shekol divrei atayra mitzuvin ano la'asoysen adoylom. A mitzvah is forever. Just as the Eibishter is eternal, so his commandment remains eternal. And that's he also brings v'chein kosev gam hilchos malachim sham, that the Torah won't be changed. Let's go to the next page, page 21. V'lachein kiven she'inyan ha'geula hu prat, that mitzvah are miklot. Once the geula becomes now a detail, part of a mitzvah, harei keshem she'are miklatim mitzvah medes li'elam, just as the mitzvah of Ari Mikla is a mitzvah that stands exactly as the Eibishter commanded forever. It has cannot have any change. There can't be any change in this promise that there will be Yachav Hashem Gvucha and there'll be Yisaf L'Chol because it's part of mitzvah Torah. So just like the mitzvah Tefillin will stay forever, the mitzvah of Ari Mikla will stay forever, and therefore there's going to have to be mitzvah Torah Yachav Hashem Gvucha. We'll talk how this is different to the MS of the rest of Torah. But it's clear that the Rambam is writing that the mitzvahs of Torah remain as they are. I think it's someone on Zoom. I don't know. These electrics. I think I would imagine it's. I think it's on here. Okay. Okay. Now we can understand the Rambam says, why is the Rambam saying the Eibishter didn't command for nothing? Why is that Noigeya? The Kivin Shazo in Shal Mitzvah, Tziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Haiz HaMechayev, Shiyav Shali Yashini Chas Hashem Hazeh, Tziva HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Toyu. Okay. So now we have to now understand, we established that it's a new Chiddush, it's a new Hageder in Mashiach, it's part of mitzvah. We said briefly that a mitzvah means that it must remain as the Eibishter commanded. How is this different to the rest of the Nevi'os, the rest of the Torah? The Torah is also L'Olam. So this is going to discuss in the next two oisios. Okay. L'Yeser Bir. Let's analyze and understand this a little more. When the Eibishter promises something through a Navi, there are certain times that changes can happen. And we have this in our Locha. If a Navi comes along and he prophesizes and he says that terrible things will happen. The Rambam brings in the Torah, the Gemaras, that it's possible that they won't occur. But the Yidden do tshuva. One of the two. Either Eibishter change his mind and he says he has a Rachmanis for whatever reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu so fit, or the Yidden did tshuva. And therefore, the Rambam writes, we cannot test a Navi to see whether he's a Navi MS by him predicting bad things, because it may not occur, and that's not because he's not a Navi MS, because the Eibishter found a reason not to do it. Even when it comes to a promise, so we find interesting thing. If it was only a personal nevius, if it's a public thing, then it can't happen. But if it's a personal thing, it could happen. Okay. So and the test for a navi, if it's a navi emes, is that he should say a dover toiv, and if it's niskayim, then we know he's a navi emes. Okay. But the Rebbe builds here an interesting hagdara. Umizem movem. Shegam kasher boru shaftoch es a navi tiskayim. Even in a case where it's a Nevi'us L'Toiv, and it's done by Rabbim. Now, and it's going to be in the sky. Let's just skip the bracket. This is not because, let's say, in quality, it's not because of that the promise to Hanavi be'etzem can't be changed, because we see it could be changed under certain circumstances. But the Eibusher said it will happen. Others are going to look at the quality of it and compare that to a mitzvah. So a mitzvah, we know a mitzvah, that means it's a commandment of the Eibusher. And just as the Eibusher is eternal, this is eternal. So it's in quality, can be changed. When it comes to a Nevi'us, so we see there are times where it can be changed. So clearly, it's of a different madrega. Let's go to the last paragraph on page 21. Now we understand in regards to the Gula. Even though it certainly falls into the category of being a promise or something good. And we have the cloud that if there's a Nevi'us to the Rabbin, L'Toiv, it has to happen. Yeah. In addition, he says in the bracket that we know that you're going to do tshuva, so it's sure going to happen. But nevertheless, let's skip the bracket. We call Mokein Havado Hirak Mitzad Gidri HaNevuah Vayifana. The strength of it is only within the realm of Nevuah, which is not as strong as a mitzvah. By it becoming part of a mitzvah, so now get the nitzchias hatera. So now we have a new hagdara nitzchias hatera. She nitzchias in shayach b'shum mitzvah, which is eternity, which can't have. It's not possible to have a bittul because there's different type of mitzvahs. So we did in this ois, we compared mitzvahs to nevi'us. And we say mitzvah is something that it's a mitzvah that it can't have a shinui. It's impossible for the mitzvah tefillin to ever be changed. Masha'enken a nevi'us, even it's a nevi'us l'toiv that b'poil mamish doesn't have a change, but it's a hagdara that can have a change. What we're going to do in this Dalit is we're going to compare this, a mitzvah, to the rest of Torah. Torah shebichsav, not nevi'us, the chumash. Because this thing that we said, that l'choira nevi'us can be changed, is in the Megillah that nevi'us that a Navi says. But in regards to Chamisha Chum Shetera, can't be changed. So the question is, since we know that Mashiach is part, Niba and Pashas Tzavim, and it was in Pashas Balak. So we already have the Nitzkias. So now we're going to look at that. Okay. We can still ask. Torah is eternal, is true in every part of Torah. The Rambam writes clearly, the Gemara says that we'll see that Kol and Avim Melon are going to be nispachal except for Megillas Esther, right? Okay, but that's a separate. But certainly, Chamisha Chum Shetera Eina B'Teilim Lo'ilam Shekol Anichta B'Teiras Meisha. Whatever is written in this in Chamisha Chum Shetera Nische V'Kaim Lo'ilam. V'Imkei, we're back to square one. Kivin Shaftach Hazakadosh Baruch Halagulam B'Foreshes B'Teiras Meisha. The promise is clearly stated in the Torah in Parshas Nitzavim and in Parshas Balak, as the Rambam writes. So Kfar Chol Alzeh. So now already has an element of nitzchias. So what is now being added in the eternity, the truth, the strength of the geula? What is added by it being part of a mitzvah? Okay. V'yesh loima. And this is interesting, a very big yisoid. In a lot of these things are yisoidistic things. We're talking about Emunah in Nevi'us. We're talking about Emunah in Nitzchis HaTorah. So now it's about the Bechlal, the whole Torah. V'yesh loima. Ki yesh chiluk ikri bein hanitzchis shebemitzvos HaTorah lehanitzchis shebeshar chalkei HaTorah. There's a fundamental difference in how we view these two things: the nitzchis of the mitzvah and the nitzchis of all of Torah. Shebichsav. Okay, what's the difference? B'sha'or chelkei HaTorah efsher she'inyan hanitzchis shebehem yiskayim lo kipshutay. It is possible that what the Torah says won't be kipshutay, the nevi'us. Elarak betoichnam haruchni, in their content, their meaning, it's going to be. Similar to the stories that happened. Then we say that the Torah is eternal, but it happened in the past. What do you mean it's eternal? It happened. So what does it mean that it's eternal? That the Toichen is eternal. Is all the hidden secrets that are shared in it. Okay. When we're talking about a mitzvah, a mitzvah, the Torah means literally. You can't say the mitzvah is a ruchnius. So that's the difference between a mitzvah and the paras and Torah. Of course, everything is nitzchi, but the question: in what way is it nitzchi? A mitzvah is nitzchi in the gashmis, the way the Torah says it. Put on tefillin means that forever you put on a pair of tefillin begashmis. You can't say one day I'm starting to put on tefillin beruchnis. It doesn't mean the content is all good, but it has to be a tefillin begashmis. Eating matzah has to be a matzah begashmis. Ukediyak lashon harambam anal v'chol hamoisiv v'hoitzi advarim shal mitzvahs mipshutam. Whoever is trying to change a mitzvah and takes the mitzvah out from its simple meaning, he's a vade badoi, he's a charlatan, he's a liar. V'roshev apikoides. The rakasher oimer al mitzvahs ha'toira she'ein kipshuton. It is only when someone says that the mitzvah of the Torah not simply means simple begashmius, yosh alav geder zed the badoi rosh hapekeres. Someone says that another part of Torah, it's not that geder of a pekeres. But in mitzvahs he is. Why? What's the difference? Ki ozu koifer biyisoid shel nitzchis HaTorah. By saying a mitzvah doesn't mean kipshutai. One is denying the yisoid. What's the yisoid? That the Torah is nitzchi. Ain't all of gather zeh. He has a different gather, which is also not a good thing. But this is if it's not the way the Chachamim taught it. But to say it's a different gather than a mitzvah. So Keshem should be Sipuriyat Torah. Now we understand, just as it is with the stories of the Torah. The same is true when it comes to a promise of the Eibusha says in Torah. So if the Eibusha promises that we'll have certain things, shekiyumam bepoil toli beoifen haftacha lefi atnoim v'gdorim shepirshu b'chazal. So in other words, the way that the Torah, the fulfillment of this promise will be, falls into different tanoim, the way the Chazal say it. And if there's no conditions, it also doesn't mean that it'll be in the simple meaning. Here's an example in the bracket. Shahaklal shahaftochas hakadosh baruch hu afsher shaloi tiskayim bepoil neshama yigrem achet chol gam al haftochas v'freshes b'Torah. This rule that a promise of the Eibusher gave may not come to fruition, but poil mamish we see in Torah Shavachsav. K'deisa v'braisa. Yeah, the Gemara in Bracha says, Ad yaver amcha Hashem until your nation will cross. This nation that you acquired will cross. Says the Gemara. That's the first time they came into Yisrael. As Rashi says, Yeshua. And then Ad Yaver Amzu Kanisa Zubi Yeshniach Shalom Migolos Bavel B'mei Ezra. So right by Oz Yoshir, we have the Torah is talking already about two comings to Yisrael. Mikan Amr Chachamim. Here the Chachamim say a very interesting thing. They're comparing the two comings to Yisrael, and the Torah includes them in one pasuk. So he says, "Ru'uyim hoyu Yisrael le'yasis lemnes ki b'mei Ezra kederech shenas lam b'mei Yeshua ben Nun." Ela shegodam achet. So when Ezra came into Yisrael, when Yeshua came to Yisrael, there was a whole nevius of the B'kiyas Yarden, the Yarden split, and then they had the whole miracle of the Yericho. It was a miraculous entry. And Chazal say because of this pasuk, it should have happened in Me'ezra. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Ad Yavid Amcha Hashem, Ad Yavid Amzu Kanisa, Elo Shegodam Achet." So there's a haftacha. The Eibusha says it's going to be in a similar way, but Godam Achet. This promise is written in the Chumash. So we know, we believe that the Torah will never change. How can we now say how can we say now that something's changed related to Sky B'Poil? So we must say, when we talk about the meaning of Pshat, the Pshat of the Pasuk, it's not necessarily you can say Nitzchis HaTorah means that it's for sure going to be the same way. Pirush HaKosov can be relevant to other things. If we take that, it's a very big yesod in Bechal and Amunah. That when it comes to a mitzvah, there's no change. When it comes to the ruchnis dikein, the haftacha, it could mean in ruchnis. If we're not zoiche, it can also mean in gashmis. So now we can understand why it's so important to the Rambam to point out that the Geula now becomes part of a mitzvah of Ari Miklot. So now Kollel get the mitzvahs Torah. Now we have a new Hagdara. It's a gather of a nitzchi, not of a nevuah, not even the nitzchi of Teresh of Chumash. It's the gather of nitzchi of mitzvah. Asher Aleph, number one, it has to happen in the simple meaning of it. Begashmus. You can't say it just happened in Beruchnis. Looks like you can't say I'm putting on tefillin Beruchnis. Beis in contrast to a nevius, it's a type of thing that you can't have a change. So it's a new Hagdorim in the whole union of Bias Mashiach. Okay. Okay, so we said that now it has a gather of mitzvahs Torah, and therefore the Eibusher has to be in the sky and begashmias, bepashtos, and it's in a way it's not shaykh shinui. L'maynaf gemina over here in the halacha this nekuda. It's a nice thing, but what's the nafkamina and halacha for this? It's just to summarize. So we have the Rambam bring a second sif, and he says af ba'ari miklot, and the Rambam seems to be pushing another nekuda. So the chidush here is there's something which is called a gather of mitzvahs Torah, which is a different gather in nitzchis Torah. And to understand the gather of that Nitzchis HaTorah, we looked at the gather of Nitzchis of a Nevius. The Nevius is be'etzim something that should happen, but because the Eibusha said so, but mitzad it's Hagdara, it's shaykh not to happen. We looked at the Hagdara, the Nitzchias of Shar Torah Shabitzav, which has to happen, but it can happen beruchnias. And then we have the Hagdara of a mitzvah of Torah that it has to happen bepashtos of begashmis, and it can't even have any change. Okay. I say, Al Pi Kol Hanal, based on all that we said before, in understanding the Ged of Nitzchias of Torah, Yesh Levayir Hatam Sharamba Moisiv Araya Melech HaMashiach Mahar Sha'af Arim Mikla to Eimenim Yachav Yisafta U'Ma'elim Hoyedav Azal Tzidkes Baruch L'Teiru. Why does he have to bring this other raya? Ein Kavonas HaRambam, the intention of the Rambam is not Lahavi Oidei Chacham et Torah. It's not just to bring another proof. Al Melech HaMashiach. Ela ba lahoisef inyan chadash. It's a new thing. And what's it new? B'choymer hadavar. How strong and strict it is. We just said before, Shamisha Eino Mamen Boy, one who does not believe in the coming of Mashiach, is a koifer b'Torah, Moshe Rabbeinu, Mnisha Torah Ida Olav. Because the Torah testifies. But now the next thing he wants to tell us, that it's not only because it's a belief that Moshe promised, but also by not believing that Mashiach is coming, one is deducting, is taking away part of the mitzvah. It's like Chas v'Shalom saying that tefillin doesn't need to have 4 batim. On the tefillin shorosh, you can have 3. Sharei l'daitoi, parat zeh shal mitzvah zari mikla liyiskayim. If someone doesn't believe Mashiach will come, so he's saying one of the part of the mitzvah of mikla won't be fulfilled. So new Agdara. If someone doesn't believe in Mashiach, it's like taking off part of a mitzvah. Okay. Let's go to the last line on that page. Ella. Shalachiyira imu koifer batoira uve Moshe Rabbeinu ma Moshe zeh shehu kirei ma mitzvah toira. Like, okay, what do you say? Yeah, you don't believe in the Torah, you even take away one of the mitzvahs. Okay, fine. Well, what's the nafkamina lahalacha? Aval piyan is barley yesh leima sheyesh nafkamina ladina. There's a nafkamina lahalacha. Ubahaktim. First, we have to understand biur dina shala oimer she'ene mam be'agula asida lovi b'nei shasayv. One second. Okay. He's saying like this before if we just look that the Torah promised the Mashiach is going to come, what happens if someone says, you know what, I think that the Eibishter changed his mind? Is that a kfir or not? Based on what we said before. We said Nevi'as, the Eibishter can change. Charata. Or we said on Nevi'as Toiv, it doesn't change. But is that a gather of a kfira? He believes that he should change. It's not clear. He certainly doesn't have, maybe he has a din of koifer b'teira shabapeh. But to say that he's koifer b'teira, I don't know. But once you establish that it's part of a mitzvah, then if you don't believe that part of the mitzvahs are going to be niskayim, then I'm right, clearly it's a koifer. Yeah, second paragraph. Kivan shaguli prat begeder mitzvah Torah. He mitzvah emes l'ad lo b'yalamim she'ez ha'machriach she'i asher li yishinui chas Hashem b'aftachas hagula. So it can't be that Hashem will change it. Sarei be'omrei heipech mizeh. If someone says the opposite, yesh olav din koifer b'Torah. And that is a kind of a whole different gather. Someone's a kafir or not. Was the word they once in the Kuti Deburim, the Sichas of Friti Rebbe, there's a long story of Chaim Rappaport, famous Rappaport, who was of the town of Baal Shem. And the Baal Shem Tov had sent him to be to bring back a Yid to Tshuva. It's a Yid who came from a very chashuv mishpacha, a big Talmud Chacham, and he used to sit and he went away and he made a lot of money, and he used to push it like a pot. It's the old day pritzim, and he used to sit on Gemara that a yarmulke, eating tarfus, and push it. He enjoyed learning Gemara. So he sent, and I think there it says that he was sitting there. He came and he was pasha. It was a chassid that of Chaim Rapport, big Talmud Goy, and he gave the Bashan to give him shemus to be mechaven, a whole story there. But he was nivel seeing the tzir after Zich Angeshikkert or something like that with all the goyim, and then he woke up late. He took out Gemara and sat and learned. So one of the in this thing he said that's mamish he's epikoides. So he started proving to him that it's not a geder and epikarsis. In Lomdas, he's sitting there without a yam, and he said that it's not mamish a geder and epikoides because epikoides has a different geder. But I call upon him, it's like, is it a geder of a koifer or not here? But it's not nafkimina a lot of halachas if it's a geder of kira potato or not. But the poil, it comes out over here, not taking away the concept of a tinik shenishba and so on, which is a whole different. But if someone who is a yid, that is a yedei sefer, as from a yid, then we have an issue. There's an Indian here. Some misha einu mamim boy, abisha einu mechake lebi yosoi. Was misschien gedavend. Misha einu mamim, misha einu mechake lebi yosoi. En nor de zontige viertel veracht. Auf Sonntag. Andere de rest van de woche is viertel van 9. So there's a, if someone doesn't believe in the union of Mashiach, the coming of Mashiach, as it says, it'll be a melech, a Mashiach, and he's going to bring in the Chayzer called Mishpatim, that thing. So then there's the Shaila, he's saying that this part of mitzvah won't take place. Okay. If someone says, I don't believe in the Geula because I don't think the psukim mean literally, it means spiritually, be connected, whatever he has. He's not a koifer. He believes the Torah. He just says the Torah means beruchnius. He agrees it means emes. Obviously, means the rochim sticking on him. Even you're going to say it's a mistake because we have a rule. So if someone doesn't believe in the cloud of he's not a koifer. If we now accept this premise that the gula is not part of a mitzvah, by saying the gula won't be in its simple way, a melech who's going to bring back and bring Torah, mitzvahs, bishleimus, and rule the world, and everyone's going to know that there's the Eibush there. He's changing a mitzvah. And if you say a mitzvah is not kibshutai, then you have so part of a mitzvah is going to be a king, and he's going to rule, and he's going to conquer Eretz Yisrael. It's going to be Shalosh Arim, and you're going to have to make more Arim Miklat, and there's going to be a din of Arim Miklat, all the wonderful things. So now, if we look at the build, we have first, the Rambam brings a posuk in Parshas Tzavim by Kibbutz Golis, and it says it clear. Then he brings a posuk in Parshas Balak that talks the interpretations to Mashiachim, and he says V'sham Niba, there was a prophecy. True, it's a prophecy of Bilam, but the fact that the prophecy is said in Torah, it's still a gather of Nevi'is, and then we have mitzvahs. So we said we need to know that there's a Maila in the pasuk of Nitzavim because it says clearly about Kibbutz Golis. There's a Maila in Parshas Balak that it talks about a Mashiach, and we have also a mitzvah. Then Oitzvav, he wants to say what's the Maila of Sham Niba? The Rambam pushes v'sham niba b'shem shlich. Apash bila nemar. What's v'sham niba? So in brief, he says that there's a mile in Nevius, even though we know obviously that the word of Torah is much more chomer than a divrei navi. Divrei Torah chamurim divrei neviim, the Gemara says. So there's a mile, there's a chomer in Nevius over Torah. First of all, you see that in the punishment. If someone who's over on a divrei navi, he's chayiv misa. Chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. Regardless of what the navi says, if someone's over on a divrei navi, he's chayiv misa. When it comes to be over on a mitzvah, so the oynish is, it depends what mitzvah. Azam mitzvah, azam veda, that's the thing. So why is there such a harshness that anything the navi says, you're chayiv misa b'dei shamayim? So the beard is, the Rebbe suggests here, that the beard is, Nevius is what's the difference between a Nevius and Torah? Torah is the word of the Eibishter. Nevius is the word of the Eibishter, how it came down to a Ben Adam. How it's already in the mind of a Navi, and how he shares it with the people. So it's more relatable. And in that way, it becomes more mechayev, because it came down to us. Okay. So if we summarize it in short, we have that the Rambam is saying that the Torah gives us three categories of, in the Torah, there's three categories that relate to Mashiach. One is the stories in Parshas Nitzavim. One's the Nevuah in Parshas Bilam, and one's the mitzvah of Ari Miklat. Okay. The last thing is more avoided. Let's do this inside. Oizai. More avoided thing and a little more Chassidus ruchnistic things. V'adayin tzorech biyur. It's nice to have this explanation. My time nifchara mitzvahs Ari Miklat. Why did the Eibishter choose? What's behind this? That the Eibishter chooses the mitzvah of Ari Miklat she'ingen the bias HaMashiach who prat b'mitzvah zoi dafke. What's the toichen? I mean, why the Eibishter did it? Because the Eibishter wanted. But what's the toichen, the lesson here, that the Eibishter chooses dafke Ari Miklat to tell us the bias HaMashiach is a mitzvah? B'yesh leima bazeh. In the honor of Shal Ari Miklat, it passes to, what's Ari Miklat? Mokim Shmira v'hagona migoy adam. If someone accidentally kills Rachmana litzlan, so he has to be protected from the goyel adam. The goyel adam has a mitzvah, according to some, there's a chiyuv, according to some opinions, that he has to kill the Reitzeach. And the Ari Miklat protects him. Shabi yoysa adam bir Miklat lo yuchal in goya boilero, he can't touch it. Ochshem sheyesh inyan hamiklat b'mokoim, just as we have an ear miklat in space, and we know that time and space is connected. Kenu gam bizman, we also have it in time. In the short term, we know that's chodesh elul, right? Who oisei azman, but from terms of the microcosm, the big one, macro, that's the whole world. It's oisei azman. There won't be any hunger, or war, or jealousy, and competition. What does that mean? Yidden will find refuge from all these evil things of Golus. And therefore, Yidden will be safe. So now, who wants to get the Yidden? Who's the Yetzer Hara? The Golus. And Yidden will be safe. When we know that the Miklat saves us from the Yetzer Hara, Chazal say this, Divrei Torah Koltin, the Makkos of the words of Torah Koltin. So there, just as Ir Miklat, atones for someone who killed Shegig. So it wasn't only a refuge, but in Beruchnius. It's also a kapora. Kenu gam Beruchnius. Shohidig nefesh meramez al kol ma'aseh. Killing a person is a remez and Ruchnius is aveda. What's the aveda? One kills his nefesh and neshama, detaches it from its life source. Shal yodam poigim ben avshay. And therefore, divrei Torah sheloimid, when one learns Torah, it's a ir miklot because poilim klita vekapar the nafshay. It reconnects the neshama to the Eibishter, and therefore the divrei Torah is quoted. So now, if this is what the toichen of Ari Miklat is, that we're taking the neshama and we're reconnecting it to the Eibishter, so now we understand why the remez of Bias HaMashiach is dafkin ir miklot. He owes Tugmar klitosim v'kaparosim shel Yisrael. At that time, so the time of Ari Miklot, the time of Mashiach completes the kapora that Yidden made a mamish. So that's when we talk about an Ari Miklot in time of a kapora, that's a time of Mashiach, and therefore that's the place where we see the mitzvah, which was related to the union of the Geula. Yeah, that's the sikha. Okay. Okay, Baruch Tiach.
The Ari Miklat is a raya for Moshe Mashiach or Melech HaMashiach?
The concept of Geula, not Melech HaMashiach. So much the union that Mashiach has to happen, Moshe Mashiach. But I suppose that once you have in the Torah defines what Mashiach is, and that is the union of Melech HaMashiach, as it says in Nevi'us. And then it tells you that will happen as part of Ari Miklot. So that tells us that the concept of Mashiach, as says the Torah, is part of Ari Miklot. When you see what I'm hearing you suggesting is I say this. So Ari Miklot tells us about there'll be a time when Eretz Yisrael will be bigger. But does that mean that Melech HaMashiach will come? The answer to that is that once the Torah defines what the Geula is and what the purpose is, and then he says, when will that happen? When all this package will happen.
So someone who denies Melech HaMashiach, you could argue, is also included in a kover, even if you accept him Moshe Mashiach.
The Rambam says, it's not, the Rambam is very clearly with his words that he means Shemi Yishein Ma'amim Boy. But the Shaila would be different. Because the Rambam says, because Sham Niva Mishnei Mashiachim. The Shaila is, if someone's koifer in the union of Melech HaMashiach, is he only koifer in Nevi'us, Haftacha, and he's not koifer in Mitzvah. But it's clear that Rambam says, Kom Yishein Ma'amim Boy, and Yishein Mechakel B'Yasoi. So it's a kfir in Torah. Okay,